Hi, Dr. Alex here, and welcome to a video all about dropping the use of Dropbox as a utility for syncing file storage across multiple PCs. Now, I've been using Dropbox for many years, perfectly happily, syncing across multiple laptops, mostly, in my collection. In some cases, the entire folder that I have my backups on were being synced from laptop to laptop, and in others where the hard drives were smaller, I was syncing only certain key folders I wanted to share with those particular laptops. But basically, Dropbox is extremely useful and easy to use for syncing files and folders across my army of little laptops, and also accessing it from work and using desktop PCs in other locations. I could still get hold of those files by logging on the web interface. And so I didn't mind paying the over £100 a year, it turned out, for the 2 terabytes of storage space that I had, since it was so universally useful. Until now. Now, unfortunately, Dropbox has made itself virtually useless to me. Full disclosure, this video is of primary interest to those using Ubuntu or Linux, and if you're using Windows or a Mac, this may be of less use or interest to you, although there may still be information in here which is of use and relevant to you. It's just not something I'm focusing on because I don't use Windows or Mac, except where I have to use Windows at work from time to time, but wherever possible, that's not what I'm using at home or on any of my own personal laptops. So a couple of months ago, Dropbox just stopped working under all my Linux Mint installs that I had across various machines. And whenever the actual application tried to run, it would open the browser, usually Firefox in this case, and splash up this warning message, which you can see here hopefully, saying that the operating system was obsolete, out of date, and you couldn't use Dropbox with it, which is annoying because I am using a slightly older version of Ubuntu as utilized under Mint primarily. So as I say, it was basically saying that my operating system was out of date and obsolete, which in some regards is true. Certainly Mint 18 had gone beyond its life where it was being supported. However, it is based on Ubuntu 16, which is, if you've installed just plain Ubuntu, available as a long-term support release, which is still being supported to this day. So the problems that Mint is encountering will be encountered by Ubuntu long-term support, which is supposedly still active and being supported. And so it is irritating that Dropbox decided to suddenly arbitrarily render the entire OS obsolete overnight, and for no good reason as far as I can see. And again, some of you are going to be holding up your hands saying, oh, why are you using a version of Ubuntu that's no longer supported, or at least a version of Mint that's no longer supported? Oh, the security risks. Well, fine, but I needed to use the older versions because I'm using, as you will have seen from earlier videos I made, older versions of both OpenShot and Audacity, because the older versions of OpenShot and Audacity were more powerful, and although it's certainly in the case of OpenShot somewhat unstable and you had to kind of work around its instability, the actual things you could do with it are way more powerful than, say, versions 2 plus of OpenShot, which, while they may look very nice with their windows with rounded edges so no one can injure themselves on those nasty pointy corners, and they'll be perfectly safe and happy in their newer versions of OpenShot, those versions of OpenShot don't have half the functionality of the older, albeit somewhat flaky, OpenShot 1.4 point whatever, that I tend to use all the time. And, oh, by the way, if anyone knows how to install OpenShot 1.4 point blah on any later versions of Ubuntu, say 18, 20, whatever, I'd love to know. I'd like to try it out. Although, that said, when I tried out Ubuntu 20, it was itself sluggish and slow compared with Ubuntu 16 or Mint 18, which was noticeably quicker than these new snazzy versions which have come out. And similarly, the older versions of Audacity were also more function-filled and nicer to use than the later versions of Audacity, which seem to have lost half their functionality, making editing audio more difficult. So, yeah, fine, there are security issues if you use older versions of Ubuntu/Mint, but I'm not that bothered. There aren't that many viruses out there for Linux as it is, and Firefox is probably the most obvious security risk when you're running any of these things, but to be fair, Firefox is getting increasingly less usable itself, and ironically, despite my hating using Google products, I'm ending up using Chrome more and more frequently anyway, which itself may have security holes, but it doesn't seem to be as buggy or security filled as Firefox these days, I'm sad to say. Anyway, point is, I need to use the slightly older versions of Ubuntu for my purposes, for my video and audio editing predominantly. And so, if you don't want me using it, well, you don't have to, but I am. And by the way, if you're using a later version of Ubuntu, you can carry on using Dropbox too. But at some point, I wouldn't be surprised if Dropbox arbitrarily renders your operating system obsolete as well at the drop of a hat. Anyway, my motivations are out of the way. I went looking for alternatives to Dropbox that could take the place of this now defunct file storage backup and synchronization system. And ironically, I discovered Google Drive. Now, obviously, I know what Google Drive is. I've used Google Drive before. In fact, I've had Google Drive for a long time, and I've used it as another backup. But it's not exactly my primary resource for doing that sort of thing. But it was always there if I needed to use it. And I discovered, by stumbling upon this wonderful article on Linovox.com on how to sync to Google Drive on Linux, how to do exactly that, sync to Google Drive on Linux. And despite my distaste for Google products, this turned out to be the simplest and most robust and the most unlikely to be obsoleted out of existence in the near future by anyone, because it's a command line based utility, Rclone, and it obviously works way back into the history of Linux, and I suspect it'll continue working forevermore because Google, for all their flaws, don't seem to want to stop people using their services. So I signed up to an increased functionality for my Google Drive to get 2 terabytes of storage, and in the process discovered that it was significantly cheaper than Dropbox, coming out to be about £70 for the year for the 2 terabytes of storage versus over £100 for Dropbox equivalent service. As soon as I got this working, and I'll go through how that happened, syncing Google Drive through Linux, Ubuntu, I of course cancelled my Dropbox account. One thing I will say for Dropbox is they don't automatically delete all your files if you're over the base quota, because basically by cancelling Dropbox you go back to the basic small amount of storage space they give you for free, but they won't delete everything that's already up there. Nice, thank you Dropbox. You were completely inconvenient in rendering your service obsolete and useless, but at least you're not deleting all my files straight off. So if I did have a problem, I could go and download stuff off the old Dropbox account, even though I'm no longer paying for the 2 terabytes of storage I have up there. But anyway, I won't be paying for that anymore, and I'm perfectly happy to ignore it from now on because my Google Drive is syncing through Ubuntu. Yay! So obviously the first thing you need to do is install Rclone. By the way, while I was testing all this, I didn't immediately pay for the 2 terabytes of storage on Google Drive. I did test it with the amount of storage I had already on Google Drive, which was significantly less because I wasn't paying for it. But I did do some test syncs before I had the confidence to dump the 2 terabytes of files and folders I wanted to back up, which ironically is in the folder called Dropbox, and even now is still in a folder called Dropbox on Google Drive because I couldn't be bothered to change the name of the folder. So in an ironic thumbing my nose at Dropbox, I still use the folder name Dropbox to store all my stuff in, because I wasn't going to change my file system on my laptop, so I wasn't going to change anything else. I'm going to just keep using the same file and folder structure I had before, but now it's all on Google Drive, and Dropbox can go whistle. Anyway, through the command line, and you'll see some of the stuff on screen now because I recorded it using screen capture. And while I just quickly mentioned that, you'll notice that some of this was done on my recently acquired ThinkPad Edge 530, which I bought just for fun as a experimental laptops to do silly things to. But while I was basically pimping this laptop out, I also decided to try out all these things on that laptop. So you'll notice also that I'm running not Linux Mint on the Edge 530, I'm also running straight Ubuntu 16 long-term support. So I am trying out straight Ubuntu in preference to Linux Mint, and if it turns out to be as useful and usable as Mint, I might just migrate over to straight Ubuntu 16. I don't like its user interface quite as much as the Mint one, because the Mint one is slightly more like old-style Windows 3. But it's close enough that I might put up with it, and so far it seems to be running very well. Anyway, first of all, as I say, we install Rclone using the terminal. Next, you have to configure Rclone to sync with your Google Drive account. At this point, you have to go from the initial post I was talking about on Linovox.com to the actual Rclone website itself, where it will tell you how to go through the config. So the first thing you want to do is, of course, set up a new remote where you have a long list of different file syncing options you can go through. And if you scroll down that list, eventually you'll find Google Drive listed as an option with a number, and you enter that number as the type of thing you want to set up. The easy thing to do is to use the generic open access link to Google Drive, although you can set up one yourself, but that's way more complicated. So I'm not going to talk about that here necessarily, although I have done that. I named my first remote Google, but the second remote where I actually used my own token, which may be quicker than using the general open access one, I called Google 2. But in this instance, I'm not going to talk about it too much detail. You can just use the one that they set up with open access for everyone. As I say, it might be a bit slower than setting up your own version, but it's less stuff for you to try and type and fill in. But full instructions are on the Rclone site. So to sync my test folder, and I opted to sync my documents folder because it was small, didn't contain very much, and I didn't care about it too much. I did Rclone sync, the path to my documents folder, and then Google : because that was where I was going to sync it to. Which did actually work. It copied the documents folder up into there, or rather it copied its contents into the Google folder at its root level. So in fact, what I then did when I did the second time was I did Rclone sync, path to the local directory that I was syncing up, and then Google : which is the name of my remote, followed by documents typed again, so it put it in the same folder name on Google, which is good practice because when I got to finally do the Dropbox folder, I knew to do Rclone sync, path to my Dropbox folder, followed by Google : and then Dropbox, so it dumps it in the same place with the same name and the same file structure. That enables you to sync up, and by the way, if you've got a 2 terabyte directory structure like I have to sync, allow yourself a few days and maybe dedicate one of your laptops / PCs to do the job to sync the stuff up, because it took several days of having the laptop on continually to sync up. It wasn't actually 2 terabytes, it was 1.3 terabytes, I think, or 1.1 terabytes of files and folders in total, but it took a while, trust me. So you might want to leave one of your laptops doing that as a full-time occupation. One thing you could do, and probably should do, and I have done, is sync or back up your favorite mega folder like I had onto another source. So I bought a very cheap 2 terabyte old style 3.5 inch hard drive for virtually nothing off eBay, and a little USB connector so I could connect it to laptops and whatever. And I actually just copied the whole folder onto that, so I always have a hard backup, and I'll use that for hard backups forever now. So I have been very cautious to make sure I didn't lose any of my files, basically. Or if I do lose files, it'll only be the most recent ones. Anyway, I recommend making a backup of everything completely separate to whatever file sync system you're setting up. However, once done, I did set up Rclone sync, path to my Dropbox folder, followed by Google 2 in the end, because I used my own token to contact Google rather than using the open one, with Dropbox after the : and that did sync everything eventually after several days from my main laptop. Actually, not from my main laptop, from my E530 with a copy of it. I got that doing the job of syncing it all up there. And then when it was done, my main laptop didn't have to do much syncing because it already had everything that I put on there to begin with. And when I synced the main laptop, it uploaded 1 or 2 extra files and was basically done. One thing I'll point out, because I forgot to do this at first and discovered after I had both the E530 and my main laptop syncing simultaneously, is that unless you add the -u switch to that command line Rclone sync blah blah blah, in fact it's Rclone sync -u and then the directory structures, etc. If you don't do that, it tries to upload and download things irrespective of the timestamps on them, so it can get a bit confusing. It can lose files, etc., or overwrite files if you don't do the -u switch to protect stuff, because that's only updating files which are newer on the system you're updating from to the one you're backing up to. So use the -u switch unless you want files to go missing or get weirdly jumbled up because of times being out of sync on different machines. So that's my one piece of advice, strong piece of advice, is Rclone sync -u, then your directory structure stuff, to make sure you don't end up losing some of your files here and there. Once I knew everything was working, the last thing I did was setting up a cron job on, at least so far, on my main laptop, so that it'll open the syncing on startup, and most of the time it seems to work, continue syncing the whole time the laptop is on. There is a bidirectional sync in Rclone, but I wouldn't use it because it's experimental and they warned against it. So I have 2 scripts set up, one for uploading and one for downloading, both of them with the -u switch turned on, added in. so that there's no syncing problems, and it'll only update things with newer versions of things when they arrive. And those scripts do start automatically when the laptop boots up. And it's very pleasing if you open Google Drive through a browser, for example, and put the activity on for the folder structure, you can see it syncing away perfectly happily in the side pane. And it's very pleasing to see that this thing is actually syncing and working just like Dropbox used to do when it was useful, but now does it just as easily, cheaper, and in a way that is not suddenly going to get whisked away and stop working suddenly, because I can't see something as basic and fundamental as a command line tool like Rclone suddenly disappearing from the OS and being unusable in any particular version of the OS. So well done, Google, and I never thought I'd say this, for being way more accommodating to users with alternative operating systems. I find this particularly ironic since I de-Googled my phones, trying to get rid of as much Google stuff as possible. And here I am thanking Google for being the most open and usable provider of storage backups out on the net at the moment. So I think I've said all I need to say. I hope this is in some way useful. I would recommend going to the website, Linovox.com, with how to sync a Google Drive on Linux, which does itself link to the Rclone website itself with lots of useful information. If you are only ever using stuff that is Windows-based and usable through GUIs only and not command lines, this might be a bit daunting to you, but it is a very small amount of command lines you need to learn to use, and the instructions online are quite clear and useful. Anyway, I hope this was useful. I hope you enjoyed my struggles with Dropbox and my attempts to bin it, and I hope you enjoyed my renewed slight respect for Google and the fact that they now work in a way that Dropbox does not. And I hope this is useful to you. And if not, I hope at least you were entertained watching my struggles. Until the next video, whatever that may be, to all my watchers, subscribers, and viewers, thank you and take care.
Masters, mistresses, the Doctor requires materials in order to maintain the TARDIS and ensure continued functionality. He similarly requires carbon-based comestibles to sustain his own biological functions and existence. Master would never say this, but he requires aid beyond that supplied by this unit in order to acquire these. To aid the Doctor in his various tasks and creations, this can be most effectively achieved via Patreon or Substack subscriptions, or through donations directly to PayPal. Or if you desire physical goods in return for your contributions, written accounts of my travels with the Doctor are also available on Amazon. Links are in the description below. Thank you, masters, mistresses.